Harold McKenney sat on his old wooden porch, watching the morning sun paint the sky orange and pink. At 73, he had learned to appreciate these quiet moments. His coffee cup warmed his hands while steam danced in the cool air. This was his favorite time of day, before the world got busy and loud. Cedar Falls wasn't a big town. Everyone knew everyone, and not much changed from year to year. Harold liked it that way. He had lived here for 47 years, raised his kids here, and buried his wife here. The town felt like an old friend, comfortable and familiar. His daily routine was simple. Wake up at 6, make coffee, sit on the porch for an hour. Then he would walk around his small garden, checking on his tomatoes and corn. The vegetables grew well in the rich soil behind his house. Harold had spent years making that dirt perfect, adding compost and working it with his hands until it was dark and soft. After Martha died 3 years ago, the garden became even more important to him. She used to joke that he loved those plants more than anything else. Maybe she was right. There was something peaceful about watching things grow, about being part of something that created life instead of destroying it. His children lived far away now. David worked in California, something with computers that Harold never quite understood. Lisa lived in Florida with her husband and 2 kids. They called him every Sunday, but the conversations always felt a bit forced. They worried about him living alone, but they had their own lives to live. Harold understood that. He had been the same way when his own father got old. The loneliness crept in during the evenings, mostly. That's when he would take his walk through town. He had the same route every day. Down Main Street, past the old hardware store, around the park, and back home through the residential streets. The walk took exactly 45 minutes, and he knew every crack in the sidewalk. On this particular evening, Harold was walking past the Miller farm when something caught his eye. A bright streak of light cut across the dark sky, much brighter than the usual shooting stars he sometimes saw.
Ow.
But this one was different. Instead of disappearing quickly, it seemed to slow down and change direction. Harold stopped walking and watched as the light moved behind the old barn on the abandoned Miller property. He stood there for a few minutes, waiting to see if anything else would happen. The Miller farm had been empty for 5 years now, ever since old Tom Miller moved to the nursing home. The fields were overgrown with weeds, and the barn was falling apart. Harold had always thought someone should buy the place and fix it up, but nobody seemed interested. The light was probably just a plane, he told himself, or maybe some kind of military training exercise. These days you never knew what the government was up to. Harold continued his walk, but he kept glancing back toward the farm. Something about that light bothered him, though he couldn't say why. When he got home, Harold sat in his living room and turned on the evening news. The weatherman said it would be clear and cool for the rest of the week. Perfect gardening weather. Harold smiled and turned off the television. He would get up early tomorrow and work in his garden before it got too hot. But sleep didn't come easily that night. Harold found himself thinking about the strange light. It had moved so smoothly, not like any aircraft he had ever seen. And the way it seemed to slow down and change direction. That wasn't normal. He had lived through enough years to know the difference between ordinary and extraordinary. The next morning, Harold woke up before his alarm clock. Something felt different, though. He couldn't put his finger on what. He made his coffee and went outside to check on his garden, just like every other morning. But what he saw made him nearly drop his cup. Perfect circles had been cut into his vegetable patch. Not torn or trampled, but cut with surgical precision. His best tomato plants were gone, harvested so carefully that the surrounding plants hadn't been damaged at all. The corn was the same way. Whole stalks had been removed. But the rows on either side were completely untouched. Harold walked around the disturbed areas, studying them carefully. In his 40 years of gardening, he had never seen anything like this. Animals didn't harvest crops this neatly. Even the most skilled farmer couldn't work with such precision. The cuts were clean, almost like they had been made with some kind of advanced tool. His first thought was neighborhood kids playing pranks, but that didn't make sense. The precision was too perfect, and besides, what would kids want with his vegetables? Nothing valuable had been taken from his house. His tools were still in the shed, His car was untouched. Harold spent the morning walking around his property, looking for any clues. He found no footprints, no tire tracks, no broken fences. Whoever had done this had been very careful not to leave any trace. The only evidence was the perfectly harvested vegetables and the strange circular patterns in his soil. By afternoon, Harold had convinced himself that there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe someone was playing an elaborate joke on him. Maybe some new farming equipment had been tested nearby. He decided to install a motion-activated light in his backyard. If someone came back, he would be ready. That evening, Harold skipped his usual walk. Instead, he sat by his back window, watching his garden. The new light cast a bright glow over the vegetable patch. If anyone tried to mess with his plants again, he would see them coming. As the hours passed, Harold began to feel foolish. Was a grown man, sitting in the dark like a child, afraid of monsters. But something deep in his gut told him that whatever had happened wasn't over. The strange light in the sky, the precise harvesting of his crops. It all felt connected somehow. Around midnight, Harold finally gave up his watch and went to bed. But he left his bedroom curtains open just in case. As he drifted off to sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that his quiet, ordinary life was about to become very extraordinary indeed. Harold woke up in the middle of the night to a soft blue glow coming through his bedroom window. At first, he thought it might be a police car or an ambulance, but the light was too steady and too blue. He lay in bed for a moment, his heart beating, faster than usual. The digital clock on his nightstand showed 2:47 a.m. The glow was coming from his backyard, right where his garden was. Harold slowly got out of bed, his joints creaking in protest. He had slept in his clothes, half expecting something like this to happen. His father's old baseball bat was leaning against the wall where he had left it earlier that evening. Harold picked up the bat and crept toward the window. The wood felt solid and reassuring in his hands. He had played baseball in high school, though that was more than 50 years ago now. Still, he remembered how to swing. When he looked out the window, Harold's breath caught in his throat. Someone was in his garden, but this wasn't like any person he had ever seen. The figure was tall and graceful, moving between his vegetable rows with fluid motions that seemed almost like dancing. Her skin gave off a soft blue light, the same glow that had woken him up. Harold rubbed his eyes, thinking he might be dreaming. But when he looked again, she was still there. The being was definitely female in shape, though everything about her was different from any human woman. Her arms and legs were longer than they should be, and her face had features that seemed to shift slightly in the strange light she gave off. She was working in his garden, but not destroying it. Instead, she moved carefully from plant to plant, touching them gently with her fingertips. Wherever she touched, the plants seemed to grow a little brighter, a little healthier. Harold watched in amazement as his tomato plants straightened up, and his corn stalks grew taller. This was impossible. Harold had lived for 73 years, and he knew what was real and what wasn't. But he was looking at something that couldn't exist, something that defied every law of nature he understood. Yet there she was, as real as the bat in his hands. When the being turned toward his window, Harold expected to feel terrified. Instead, a strange calm washed over him. Her eyes met his through the glass, and he saw something there that surprised him. She looked afraid, like a child caught doing something wrong. Her expression was so human, so familiar, that Harold felt his fear melting away, against every instinct telling him to stay inside and call the police. Harold found himself walking toward his back door. The baseball bat felt heavy in his hands. Now, not because he was weak, but because he realized he wouldn't need it. Whatever this being was, she meant no harm to him or his garden. The cool night air hit his face as he stepped outside. The being had stopped moving and was watching him carefully. Up close, she was even more beautiful and strange than she had appeared from the window. Her skin had a pearl-like quality and her hair moved gently even though there was no wind. Harold expected her to run away or disappear, but instead, she raised one long, graceful hand in what looked like a gesture of peace. Then, something extraordinary happened. She began to speak, but not with her mouth. Her voice came from inside Harold's head, clear and gentle. "Elder One," the voice said, "please do not fear me. I mean no harm to you or your growing place." Harold nearly dropped his bat. He looked around to make sure no one else was there, then looked back at the being. "You're talking to me," he said out loud, his voice cracking a little. "In my head, yes," came the reply. "I'm Zara. I come from a place very far from here. My traveling vessel was damaged when I entered your world's air, and I have been stranded here." Harold felt like he was in a dream, but everything seemed too real, too detailed. The smell of his garden, the cool night air, the way his old knees ached from standing on the hard ground. If this was a dream, it was the most vivid one he'd ever experienced. "You're not from Earth," Harold said. "It wasn't a question." Zara replied. "I am from a world you call Kepler, though we have a different name for it. My people sent me here to learn about your world and your people." Harold studied her face, trying to understand what was happening. "And you've been taking vegetables from my garden?" Zara looked down at the ground, and Harold could swear she looked embarrassed. "I am sorry for taking without permission. My body requires certain minerals found in your soil to survive. Your growing place has the richest, most nourishing soil I have found on your world." It made Harold feel proud despite the strangeness of the situation. He had worked for decades to build up his soil, adding compost and organic matter year after year. "You picked the right garden," he said. "I've been working on this dirt for 40 years. "I know," Zara said, and Harold could hear something like admiration in her mental voice. "I have watched you work here for many days. You have a gift for helping things grow. You care for your plants like they are your children." Harold felt a warmth in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years. When was the last time someone had noticed his work, appreciated what he did? Even his own children didn't understand why he spent so much time in his garden. "Why are you telling me this?" Harold asked. "Why didn't you just keep taking what you needed?" Zara looked up at him, and Harold saw something in her strange. Shifting features that reminded him of Martha when she was worried about something. "Because I need more than just your soil," she said. "I need your help." Harold felt his world tilting on its axis. Here was this impossible being, this woman from another world, asking for his help. An old man who most people barely noticed anymore. "My vessel needs more than just the minerals from your soil to repair itself. It needs understanding of your world, your people. I have tried to approach others, but they react with fear and violence. You are different. You create life instead of destroying it." Harold looked around his garden, seeing it through new eyes. His tomatoes and corn, his carefully tended soil, the compost pile behind his shed. It suddenly seemed important in a way he had never imagined. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "I want to learn from you," Zara said. "About your world, your people, your ways of growing things. In return, I can share knowledge from my world. But first, I need your help to repair my vessel so I can return home." Harold stood there in his garden, an old man in his pajamas holding a baseball bat, talking to an alien woman who glowed in the darkness. 3 days ago, his biggest worry had been whether his tomatoes would ripen before the first frost. Now he was being asked to help repair a spaceship. "This is crazy," he said. Out loud, "Yes," Zara agreed. "But will you help me?" Harold looked at the strange, beautiful being who had somehow seen value in his simple life and work. For the first time in 3 years, since Martha died, he felt truly needed. Someone was asking for his help, not out of pity or obligation, but because they believed he had something important to offer. "Yeah," Harold said, surprising himself with how quickly he made the decision. "I'll help you." Over the next few nights, Harold found himself looking forward to darkness in a way he never had before. Each evening, after the sun disappeared behind the trees, he would sit by his back window and wait for the soft blue glow that meant Zara had returned to his garden. Their friendship developed slowly, like the careful growth of his vegetables. At first, Harold was nervous and asked simple questions. Where did she come from? How did she travel through space? What was her world like? Zara answered patiently, sometimes showing him pictures in his mind that took his breath away. Her planet was called Kepler 44 to be. Though her people had a name for it that sounded like wind chimes when she shared it with him. The images she showed him were beautiful, but sad. Rolling hills that had once been green were now brown and cracked. Rivers that had run clear and deep were reduced to muddy trickles. Cities that had thrived for thousands of years were slowly being abandoned. "What happened to your world?" Harold asked one night as they sat together in his garden. He had brought out an old lawn chair for himself, while Zara seemed comfortable sitting cross-legged on the ground. "We grew too fast," Zara explained, her mental voice heavy with regret. "We built cities and machines, just like your people do, but we forgot to take care of the soil, the water, the air. By the time we realized our mistake, it was almost too late." Harold understood that feeling. He had watched his own town change over the years, seen farmland turned into shopping centers and parking lots. "So you're looking for a new place to live?" "Some of my people want that," Zara said. "But others, like me, believe we should learn how to heal our world instead of abandoning it. That's why I came here, to study worlds like yours, to understand how life can thrive." Harold felt proud that his little planet could teach an advanced alien civilization anything, but then he thought about the news he watched every night. Wars, pollution, climate change. "We're not doing such a great job ourselves," he said honestly. "But you are," Zara replied, gesturing to his garden. "Look at what you've created here. You've taken dead soil and made it rich with life. You've learned to work with nature instead of against it. This is what my people need to understand." Harold had never thought of his gardening as anything special. It was just something he enjoyed, something that gave him peace and purpose. Through Zara's eyes, he began to see it differently. Every tomato plant he had nurtured, every handful of compost he had added to the soil, every hour he had spent learning about what his plants needed, it all mattered more than he had ever imagined. "Tell me about your family," Zara said one evening. "Speak of them, but with sadness." Harold found himself talking about Martha, about how they had worked in the garden together for 30 years. He told Zara about his children, how proud he was of them, but how distant they had become. He talked about the loneliness that had settled into his life like frost on the autumn grass. "On my world," Zara said gently, "the elders are treasured. Their knowledge is considered the most valuable thing we have. It saddens me that your people do not see your worth." Harold felt tears prick his eyes. When was the last time someone had called him valuable? When was the last time someone had actually listened to what he had to say about soil composition or plant care or the 100 other things he had learned over 7 decades of living? As the nights passed, Harold learned more about Zara's mission. Her ship had been damaged when it entered Earth's atmosphere, and she had been stranded for almost 2 weeks. The crash had damaged her communication equipment, so she couldn't contact her people or call for help. Worse, her ship's biosystems were failing, and she needed specific organic compounds to repair them. "That's why you need my vegetables," Harold realized. "Not just any vegetables," Zara explained. "Your soil has the perfect combination of minerals and organic matter that my ship's living systems need to heal. But I need more than just a few plants. I need large amounts of very specific materials." Harold learned that Zara's people had developed technology that was part machine, part living organism. Her ship grew and healed itself, but only if it had the right nutrients. The crash had damaged the ship's ability to create these nutrients on its own. "How much do you need?" Harold asked. Zara showed him an image in his mind: bags and bags of composted soil, harvested vegetables and other organic materials. Far more than his small garden could provide. "I can't give you that much," Harold said, feeling helpless. "I'm just one old man with a small backyard." "I know," Zara said. "That's why I need to ask you for something much more difficult." Harold waited, sensing that whatever she was about to ask would change everything. "I need you to help me understand your people," Zara said. "I need you to teach me about humans, about your communities, about how you work together. My people have tried to make contact with your governments, your military, your scientists, but they always react with fear and weapons." Harold could understand that. The spaceship had landed in the middle of town. He probably would have been scared too. "But you're different," Zara continued. You create instead of destroy. You nurture instead of harm. You understand the value of patience and careful work. I believe you could help me find others like you, people who would help instead of attack. Harold felt the weight of what she was asking. She wanted him to become some kind of ambassador between humans and aliens. Him, a retired widower who most people barely noticed anymore. Why me, he asked. I'm nobody special. I don't know important people or have connections to the government. That's exactly why, Zara replied. Important people, governments, military leaders, they think in terms of power and control, but you think in terms of growth and cooperation. You understand that the best things take time and patience. Harold thought about his garden, about the years he had spent learning what each plant needed, how to create the perfect soil, how to work with the seasons instead of against them. Maybe Zara was right. Maybe those skills were more valuable than he had ever imagined. What would I have to do? He asked. Help me gather the materials I need to repair my ship, Zara said. But more than that, help me understand your world. Show me how humans like you think, how they work together, how they solve problems. Help me find others who might be willing to help. Harold looked around his garden, at the vegetables that had brought this amazing being into his life. 3 weeks ago, he had been counting down the days until winter when he would have nothing to do but sit inside and watch television. Now he was being asked to help save an alien civilization. If I help you, Harold said slowly, what happens? Then do you just leave and never come back? Zara was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, she admitted. That would depend on many things. But Harold, I promise you this. If you help me, your life will never be ordinary again. You will be part of something bigger than you ever imagined. Harold thought about Martha, about how she had always encouraged him to take chances, to not be afraid of new adventures. He thought about his children, living their busy lives far away. He thought about the years stretching ahead of him, empty and quiet and predictable. "Kay," he said, his voice stronger than he felt. "I'll help you." Harold woke up the next morning feeling like a completely different person. For the first time in 3 years, he had a real purpose. He made his coffee and sat on his porch, but instead of just watching the sunrise, he was making plans. Big plans that would have seemed impossible just a week ago. The first challenge was gathering the materials Zara needed without raising suspicion. Harold had lived in Cedar Falls long enough to know that people noticed everything. If he suddenly started buying massive amounts of fertilizer and soil, folks would start asking questions. He decided to start with his old contacts from the county extension office. Harold had volunteered there for 15 years after he retired, helping new gardeners learn the basics. He called up Jerry Thompson, who still worked there part-time. "Jerry, it's Harold McKenney," he said into the phone. "I'm working on a special composting project, and I need some advice about soil testing." Jerry was happy to help. They talked for an hour about different soil types around the county, which farms had the richest dirt, and where Harold might find the best organic materials. Harold took careful notes, knowing that Zara would need this information. Over the next few days, Harold became a man on a mission. He drove his old pickup truck to farms all over the county, telling people he was doing research for an experimental garden project. The farmers were happy to let him take soil samples, especially when he offered to pay for them, at the Henderson farm. Harold met with old Pete Henderson, who had been growing corn for 40 years. "You know, Harold," Pete said as they walked through his fields, "I've never seen anyone get so excited about dirt before." Harold laughed. "You know what they say, good soil is the foundation of everything." What Harold didn't tell Pete was that some of this soil might end up helping to repair an alien spaceship. That was the kind of detail that might be hard to explain. Each night, Harold would meet with Zara in his garden and show her the samples he had collected. She would touch each bag of soil with her fingertips, and Harold could see her face light up when she found something particularly useful. "This one is perfect," she said one evening, holding a sample from the old Miller farm. "The mineral content is exactly what my ship needs." Harold felt proud, like a student who had just gotten an A on an important test. But more than that, he felt useful. For the first time in years, his knowledge and experience were making a real difference. As the work continued, Harold began to notice changes in himself. His arthritis pain, which had bothered him for years, started to fade away. His energy levels increased, and he found himself sleeping better than he had in months. Even his memory seemed sharper. "Is this normal?" he asked Zara one night as they worked together mixing soil samples. "My people's technology affects those who work closely with us," Zara explained. "The bionutrients in my ship's systems are designed to heal and strengthen. You're experiencing some of those benefits." Harold looked at his hands, which had been gnarled and stiff just weeks ago. Now they moved smoothly, without pain. "You're making me younger?" "It's not younger," Zara said gently. "Healthier, stronger. Your body is healing itself with help from our technology." Harold felt a mix of amazement and worry. "Is it permanent?" "I don't know," Zara admitted. "You're the first human to experience this." "But Harold, there's something else you should know. The changes aren't just physical." Over the following days, Harold discovered what she meant. He found he could sense things about his plants that he never could before. He could tell when they needed water just by walking near them. He could feel the health of the soil through his fingertips. Most surprisingly, he was developing a weak version of the mental communication that Zara used. "This is incredible," Harold said one evening, as he successfully sent a simple thought to Zara. "I can actually talk to you without words." "Your mind is adapting," Zara replied. "This is unprecedented. My people will be amazed to learn that humans can develop these abilities." As Harold's abilities grew, so did his confidence in their mission. He organized a meeting at the community center, claiming he wanted to start a county-wide composting program. 15 local farmers and gardeners showed up, all curious about Harold's sudden enthusiasm for soil science. "I've been doing some research," Harold told the group, "and I think we could create the richest, most productive soil in the state if we work together." The farmers were interested. Harold had a reputation for growing the best vegetables in the county, and they respected his knowledge. Over the course of 2 hours, he convinced them to contribute materials to his experimental composting project. What the farmers didn't know was that they were helping to repair an alien spaceship, but Harold was learning to live with secrets. Some truths were too big to share, at least not yet. The real breakthrough came when Harold took Zara to visit the old Miller farm at night. The abandoned property was where her ship had crashed, hidden in a grove of trees behind the crumbling barn. Harold had driven past this place thousands of times, never knowing it held the most important secret in the world. Zara's ship was unlike anything Harold had imagined. It wasn't metal and wires like the spaceships in movies. Instead, it looked almost alive, with smooth curves and surfaces that seemed to pulse gently in the darkness. Parts of it were clearly damaged, with sections that looked withered and brown. "It's beautiful," Harold whispered as they approached the ship. "It's dying," Zara said sadly. "But with your help, it can heal." They spent hours working together, applying the soil mixtures and organic materials Harold had gathered. Where they placed the rich earth, the ship's surface began to brighten and strengthen. Harold could actually feel the ship responding to their work, like a plant drinking water after a long drought. "It's working," Harold said, amazed. "I can feel it getting stronger." "So can I," Zara replied. "But Harold, there's something I need to tell you. As my ship heals, it's becoming more connected to you. The bionutrients aren't just helping your body, they're changing your fundamental structure." Harold looked at his hands, which now had a faint glow similar to Zara's. "What does that mean?" "It means you're becoming something new," Zara said. "Something between human and my people. You'll be able to survive in different environments, communicate in ways humans never could, and understand life in ways that will seem impossible to others." Harold thought about his old life, sitting on his porch every morning, tending his small garden, taking the same walk every evening. Then he thought about the work they were doing, the ship that was healing under his touch, and the amazing being who had become his closest friend. "I'm okay with that," he said. "My old life was ending anyway. Maybe it's time for a new one to begin." As they worked through the night, Harold realized that he was no longer just helping Zara repair her ship. He was preparing for a journey that would take him further from home than he had ever imagined. And for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't afraid of what came next. The ship pulsed gently under their hands, growing stronger with each passing hour. Harold could feel its gratitude, its eagerness to fly again. Soon it would be ready to take them both on an adventure beyond anything he had ever dreamed possible. 3 weeks later, Harold stood in his backyard looking at his garden one last time. The vegetables had grown bigger and healthier than ever before, thanks to the alien technology that had enhanced the soil. His tomatoes were the size of softballs, and his corn stalks reached toward the sky like green towers. But Harold's attention wasn't really on his plans. Tonight everything would change forever. Zara's ship was nearly repaired. The damaged sections had healed completely, and the biosystems were running stronger than ever. Harold had helped with every step of the process, learning things about life and growth that no human had ever known before. "Are you ready?" Zara asked, appearing beside him in the gathering dusk. Her presence no longer startled him. In fact, Harold had come to depend on their evening conversations more than anything else in his life. Harold looked around his property, at the house where he and Martha had shared 30 years of marriage, at the porch where he had drunk his morning coffee for decades. "I think so," he said, "but I need to take care of a few things first." Over the past week, Harold had been quietly putting his affairs in order. He had written letters to his children, explaining that he was going on an extended journey to help with agricultural research in remote locations. He couldn't tell them the truth, not yet, but he wanted them to know. He was happy and had found a new purpose. The hardest part had been deciding what to do with his house and garden. Harold had finally asked his neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, if she would look after the place. She was a widow too, and she understood the importance of keeping a garden alive. "I'll take good care of your vegetables," she had promised. "And if anyone asks, you're traveling with some agricultural program. Very secretive, very important." Harold had smiled at that. It was true in a way. Now, as he prepared to leave everything behind, Harold felt a strange mix of excitement and sadness. This little house had been his whole world for so long, but that world had become too small for him. The changes in his body and mind had opened up possibilities he never could have imagined. "Tell me again about your world," Harold said as they walked toward the old Miller farm where the ship waited. Zara painted pictures in his mind of the planet they would visit first. Her people lived in cities that grew like forests, with buildings that were part architecture and part living organism. They had learned to work with nature instead of against it, though that knowledge had come almost too late to save their world. "They'll be amazed by what we've learned here," Zara said. "Your understanding of soil health and sustainable growing could help heal our damaged lands, and you'll be proof that humans and my people can work together peacefully." Harold felt nervous about meeting an entire alien civilization, but also excited. He had spent his whole life learning about growing things. Now he would get to share that knowledge on a scale he never could have dreamed. As they reached the ship, Harold was struck again by how alive it looked. The surface rippled gently like water, and he could sense its eagerness to fly among the stars again. When he placed his hand on the hull, the ship responded with what felt like a warm greeting. "It knows you now," Zara explained. "You're part of its family." Inside the ship, Harold discovered spaces that defied everything he thought he knew about. Physics. Rooms that were larger inside than outside. Walls that glowed with soft light. A garden area where Zara grew the foods her people needed. "This will be your space," Zara said, showing him a room that had apparently grown itself just for him. The walls were curved and organic, like being inside a giant seed pod. "The ship has analyzed your needs and created an environment where you'll be comfortable." Harold looked around in wonder. A small bed had grown from the floor, along with what looked like a desk and chairs. Everything was perfectly sized for him, as if the ship had been studying his body and preferences. "How long will we be gone?" Harold asked. "Time works differently in space," Zara replied. "The journey to my world will take what feels like several months to us, but only days will pass on Earth." And Harold... ... She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "The changes in your body mean you could live much longer than a normal human, possibly centuries." Harold sat down heavily in one of the chairs. Centuries he had expected to live maybe another 10 or 15 years. Now he was being told he might see the year 2300 or 2400 or beyond. "Are you afraid?" Zara asked gently. Harold thought about that. 3 months ago, he had been counting down the seasons, wondering if he would see another Christmas. Now he was preparing to travel to another world and possibly live for hundreds of years. "No," he said, surprising himself. 8. I'm excited." As the ship prepared for takeoff, Harold went to what Zara called the observation area. Through the transparent wall, he could see his town spread out below. Cedar Falls looked so small from up here, so peaceful and quiet. Somewhere down there, Mrs. Rodriguez was probably watching television, not knowing that her neighbor was about to leave the planet. "We've left instructions," Zara said, joining him. "Your garden will become a meeting place for others like us. My people will send representatives to Earth, and they'll know to find the humans who understand growing things, who care for life instead of destroying it." Harold smiled at that. His little backyard garden was going to become an embassy between worlds. The ship lifted silently into the night sky. Harold watched his house disappear, then his town, then the familiar landscape of his home state. Soon all of Earth was just a blue marble hanging in the darkness. "Any regrets?" Zara asked. Harold thought about Martha, about his children, about the quiet life he was leaving behind. Then he thought about the adventure ahead, the new worlds he would see, the knowledge he would gain and share. "No regrets," he said. "For the first time in years, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." As their ship sailed between the stars, Harold began to understand that his life hadn't ended when Martha died. It had just been waiting for the right moment to begin again. He had gone from being a forgotten old man to becoming humanity's first ambassador to the cosmos. And it all started because he knew how to grow vegetables. Harold smiled as he settled into his new life among the stars. Behind them, Earth continued its ancient orbit around the sun. But in a small town called Cedar Falls, in a backyard garden that glowed with alien energy, the seeds of a new future for humanity were already beginning to grow. The old man who had thought his story was ending had discovered that it was just beginning. This new chapter would be more amazing than anything he had ever dared to dream.